WrestleMania 37 has officially come and gone, and if we're being honest, it was a lot better than like most of us probably thought it was going to be, considering all the circumstances. I mean, it was better than WrestleMania 36 because last year they kind of had to throw a show together because of the pandemic and everything. But with this being the first WrestleMania with fans back, it was pretty incredible. I mean, there were some incredible moments that we'll probably never forget and some amazing stories that concluded through the actual in-ring work, surprisingly enough, and the in-ring wrestling and everything else. And to top it all off, of course, the fans were back in attendance. They put on the show that I hoped would be really good because of fans being there and everything else, and I think they delivered on that for the most part. There were some things that it was like, why did they make this decision? But all in all, it was a pretty good show for once again being two nights, just like WrestleMania 36 was. There were 14 matches across the whole card, and today I'm going to be ranking every single one of them and giving some of my thoughts on each of them as well. So before any sort of rain delay, you'll understand that reference if you watched WrestleMania 37 on the first night. Here are my rankings of every match from WrestleMania 37. At number 14, which would of course be the worst of all the matches on the card, surprisingly enough, is the match I was looking forward to the most, which of course was The Fiend versus Randy Orton. I could ramble on and on all day, honestly, about I don't know how they managed to screw this up. Literally, the match was about maybe a minute or 2 minutes long. I liked The Fiend's entrance. He came out of like some kind of tunnel and he still had his like burnt gear on and everything else, and then he kind of transformed into the regular Fiend. Then he came out of a giant Jack in the Box, or as Michael Cole put it, a box-like structure. He came out of that and then he dove off of that and like attacked Randy Orton. Then Orton started working him over a little bit, did some DDTs off the middle rope, throws him onto the announce table, gets him back in the ring. Braid's about to hit the Sister Abigail when Alexa Bliss appears on top of the box, oozing black goo from her head like we've been seeing all these months leading up to this, which distracts the Fiend, who turns around into an RKO and loses. I don't know how they managed to... That's what they gave us on the grandest stage of them all, with that much build into this match. It was so annoying, and it didn't really make any sense. Like, if this match had been like 15 minutes and done that, it probably would have been better, because then it's like shocking that, oh, Alexa Bliss just cost the Fiend. Like, what? That just happened, you know? But they did it in like a minute, and this match started night 2 of WrestleMania. And this one was probably the one that had the most build, because it's been building since TLC. Like, we all wanted to see, for the most part at least, Randy Orton versus The Fiend at WrestleMania, to see the epic conclusion to all this torture and torment that The Fiend and Alexa Bliss have been giving Orton over the months. And they didn't deliver on that at all. Instead, they basically promoted Monday Night Raw, or even WrestleMania Backlash, which is what it's being called now. Their Backlash pay-per-view is next, called WrestleMania Backlash, where essentially we're probably going to see a lot of rematches from WrestleMania. But we'll talk about that probably in a future video. But this match didn't deliver on anything, and all it did was make The Fiend seem like he was he was beatable. Like, you could beat him with one move. It was almost like the RKO was devastating. Like, it was worse than, honestly, that Hell in a Cell finish from a few years ago with him and Seth Rollins, where it ended in like a referee stoppage because Rollins went crazy and started beating The Fiend with a hammer. It was worse than that, and a lot of people really ragged on that match, and I hated this match. Like, surprisingly, I had to put this at the worst one, because it lasted pretty much a minute or two. You could hear everyone in attendance booing, and that's not what I wanted to see out of The Fiend versus Randy Orton. And there was no explanation as to what happened. All they've done pretty much is leave us, okay, yeah, we're going to tune into Raw to see how they explained this, but that's not what we wanted to see on the grandest stage of them all at WrestleMania for this feud they've been building for 3 months. And number 13 is actually the match I was going to put at the worst match originally. was the women's tag team turmoil match. I felt it was a bit clunky and boring. And honestly, they haven't done a good job building up the women's tag team division in WWE. They don't have any meaningful tag teams, honestly, other than maybe like the Riot Squad. Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax were brought together randomly a while ago when they even won the titles. I didn't want to see Shayna Baszler in the tag team division. I don't think anybody did. We kind of wanted to see her win the Raw Women's title because that's how good she is. But no, they put her with Nia Jax. And there weren't any really memorable spots in this match either. It just kind of happened, and then because it was a gauntlet match. Some of the teams we didn't expect to get eliminated first got eliminated first, or got eliminated instantly almost. Like Carmella and Billie Kay were a team for some reason, and they eliminated a few teams. I think the Riot Squad got eliminated like right away, and it was won by Natalya and Tamina, which yeah, I predicted that, but I didn't really care to see it. I honestly didn't care about this match, but when it comes to overall throughout the show, this was better than The Fiend versus Randy Orton, because that match just irritated me. At number 12, I put Big E versus Apollo Crews for the Intercontinental Championship in a Nigerian drum fight match, which the whole premise of the match was kind of dumb, because they didn't really... It was basically a no-holds-barred match, or no disqualification or something, with Nigerian drums around the ring, which weren't even used that often. Like literally, I think Big E or Apollo or Big E, one of them was thrown into the drums, and that was it. They weren't used in the match. They weren't they weren't used as a weapon. Nobody went through a drum, which would have been fun to see. There was a gong there that didn't really get used because it got knocked out of Big E's hand. But the whole premise just didn't make any sense, really. They could have just made it a straight-up... I know we've seen a few straight-up one-on-one matches already between these two, but they could have just done that again. It would have been fine, and it would have made more sense for Apollo to beat Big E in a straight-up one-on-one match like they did at Elimination Chamber or Fastlane, where they had that kind of screwy finish. This could have just been the... Okay, we'll let him have this match again so that we can fix this mistake that we made or whatever. But also the ending of this match was kind of stupid because Dabba-Kato came out, now known as General Aziz, I believe is what he's going to be called, because they filed the trademark for that name, and he was dressed like some kind of general, came out and attacked Big E, allowing Apollo to win. That ending was stupid. It didn't make any sense. And why does Apollo Crews need... Not every bad guy needs some kind of bigger dude to help them. We see it with AJ Styles and Omos. We don't need it with Apollo Crews. Like, he's good enough in the ring, I feel like, where he could have just beaten Big E on his own and, won the Intercontinental Championship. Instead, it happened this way. Now we're going to have to see, 6 months of Apollo and Dabba-Kato together as a team. And WWE... with the commentary team pretending like they don't know that that's Dabba-Kato. Like, they were like, who's this big guy? Like, we don't know it's him. Like, we saw him on Raw Underground a few months ago or whatever. It was stupid. At number 11, I've placed the Raw Tag Team title match. I thought it was better than, the Intercontinental title match. It was okay, but most of the match was just Kofi and Xavier basically doing what the heels do normally, where they worked over AJ Styles for most of the match. They pretty much beat him up a lot, kept him from tagging in Omos. And then once AJ got there, he got the hot tag and everything else. Then Omos just gets in and pretty much was the Great Khali the whole time. Just some big boots and chops and things, and then he picks him up and slams him down and pinned him with his foot. Just kind of laid his foot on Kofi Kingston to pin him. 1, 2, 3. It wasn't as good of a match that it could have been if it was say AJ Styles and Ricochet as a tag team against them two, or even the Hurt Business, Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin as a team would have been good against the New Day. I know we've seen that already, but just the fact that it was Omos and he's kind of just the new Great Khali basically. The match wasn't that exciting, honestly. It was cool to see someone new win the tag team titles because AJ and Omos did win, but I mean, the match itself just was kind of whatever, let's just move on, I guess. It was a transitional match, essentially. At number 10 is the women's tag team title match. It was surprisingly decent, like, to be honest, and I ranked it above the Raw Tag Team title match because it did have a little bit more action in it. It wasn't just like somebody gets beat up for 20 minutes and then they get the hot tag. It was back and forth, and we did get to see a little bit of like Tamina and Nia Jax competing against each other one-on-one essentially. And it did have a bit of build and a few memorable spots, but having Shayna and Nia retain the titles, I didn't like that too much. I want to see Shayna break off from Nia, not continue to be with Nia. Shayna needs to be the one challenging Rhea Ripley for the Raw Women's Championship or something, which I'll get into that later on as well, but I don't know. It was decent. That's all I can say about it. It was a women's match. It was definitely better than the Tag Team Turmoil match they did earlier, which, if we're being honest, could have been replaced with the SmackDown Tag Team title match they did on Friday, because that was a lot better. But we got what we got, so this match was better than that. I just feel like whatever, the women's tag team division, I don't really care about it, honestly. Moving on to number 9, I had Braun Strowman versus Shane McMahon in the steel cage match. It was actually a pretty good steel cage match. Like, it had some unique spots in it, such as like I don't think we've ever seen these done in a steel cage before. Like, there was one moment where Shane was about to literally crawl down. He was crawling down the outside of the cage. He was about to win. Then Braun Strowman gets up on the turnbuckle from inside, rips off part of the cage wall, and just grabs Shane by the collar and kind of just brings him back through the cage, like through the wall. I thought that was pretty unique. And also later on, him and Shane were both up on top of the cage, and he threw Shane off the cage, which was similar to like Mick Foley going through the cage against the Undertaker, or the Cell, when he fought the Undertaker back in the day, as Mankind, I guess. But you could feel the impact of that, and that probably did hurt. And then Braun just picked up the win after that. He hit a power slam and won. That's honestly the match where I thought Dabba-Kato would interfere, but for some reason they decided to go with him interfering in a SmackDown match, even though he was drafted to Raw. But it would have made more sense to do it here, because he could have aligned himself with Shane McMahon, the whole Raw Underground thing and everything else. But all in all, this was surprisingly a pretty good match, a pretty fun match, just for something to watch. I mean, it wasn't as exciting as like the main events or anything, but it was there, and it actually surprised me, because I was going into this, I did not care about this match one bit. They did a good job of surprising me with that. At number 8, I have Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn. It was a really fun match. I just don't think they needed Logan Paul involved in it at all. He didn't really do anything until after the match, when he kind of, I guess he attacked Sami, or he just kind of like insulted Sami Zayn, and Sami left, and then Kevin Owens stunned Logan Paul. Like, it was just there for like a comedy, or like a comedic segment, but it really didn't need to happen. Owens and Zayn always have put up good matches against each other. This was okay. Just the Logan Paul stuff, though, like, didn't need to be there. It wasn't a bad match, though. They didn't do anything stupid with it, at least. And then number 7, the other match that didn't really have a title involved or anything like that, and just kind of had a few months of build, I think, like maybe 2 months of build. Rollins versus Cesaro. The match went about as great as I thought it would, because those two were really good in the ring. It had a lot of back and forth maneuvers and transitions into moves. Like, I think at one point Seth went for the stomp, and I think Cesaro countered it into the swing somehow, or an uppercut or whatever. It was a lot of interesting and unique transitions into other moves and counters and everything else. Also, the right man won in Cesaro. I hope this leads to Cesaro getting a push off of this. He is an incredible athlete in the ring and everything, and I hope that leads to him getting a title shot. Maybe him versus Apollo. I would have liked to see him versus Big E for the Intercontinental title. These two, like, strong men fighting each other. But, I mean, we'll see where this goes. Maybe he'll win Money in the Bank or something. I don't know. I just hope beating someone like Seth Rollins does lead him to something big in the future. Coming in at number 6 for me was Sheamus versus Riddle for the United States title. The match actually went better than I expected it to be, and it kind of felt like one of the matches that Sheamus had with Drew McIntyre recently. Like, it wasn't as big as that. Like, they had like almost a 40-minute match on Raw the one day. If this had been that, it would have been really incredible and probably further up the list. But just in terms of what we got, it was a pretty decent match, and there was a lot of exciting spots in it. The ending was incredible as well. Riddle went for like a springboard moonsault, and Sheamus countered by hitting him with a brogue kick, which I guess he really did kick him in the face because Riddle was bleeding after the match. He probably lost a tooth or something. It looked pretty sick. And Sheamus actually ended up winning the title, which I'm okay with that as well. I hope that leads to like some maybe Sheamus versus Keith Lee or something along those lines, or maybe even Sheamus and Drew, which we'll talk about later. Maybe Drew could challenge Sheamus for the U.S. title, something along those lines. They could build off of, well, Sheamus won but Drew lost and all that stuff. Whatever they want to go with it. Even though Riddle lost, I'm wondering what they'll do with him next as well. Maybe we'll get a rematch with these two, because that was a fun match. You got to check it out if you haven't seen it. That brogue kick at the end was brutal, and it was probably the coolest brogue kick I've seen Sheamus do in a while, so hats off for that. At number 5, I had Rhea Ripley versus Asuka for the Raw Women's Championship. It was okay for what it was, and it was actually pretty decent. They did a good job making a match out of something that had 2 weeks of build, and I'm pretty sure it probably wasn't the original planned or intended match they were going to go for. It was probably going to have Charlotte versus Asuka, but they worked with what they had, and it was actually pretty good, back and forth and everything else. Rhea Ripley's really good in the ring, and I'm glad she won the title. And she was also the runner-up at the Royal Rumble this year, but they didn't really mention that. But for what it was, this match was okay. It went a lot longer than I expected, I think, but just the back and forth and everything else, it was what it was. It probably would have been better, honestly, if it was Charlotte versus Asuka. I would have rather seen Charlotte versus Rhea as like a rematch from last year's Mania. But for what we got, it wasn't that bad of a match. At number 4 was Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley for the WWE Championship. There was a lot of really hard-hitting action, which is what I expected out of these two, because they are two hard-hitting superstars. And it was basically two of the biggest stars of the current era competing like two of the biggest stars of the current era. I mean, Bobby Lashley felt like Brock Lesnar in this match. Drew McIntyre felt like Drew McIntyre, just like he did last year. It went longer than Drew's match with Brock Lesnar, which is what I had hoped. There was no one interfered in this match either. Like, it wasn't, the Hurt Business didn't reunite. There was no Baron Corbin, thankfully, to interfere to help Bobby win. Bobby ended up winning with the Hurt lock locked in, which is the full Nelson, basically, or the Master lock, if you knew Chris Masters. And he just won. Like, he made Drew pass out with that locked in, which I thought was pretty cool, and it doesn't take anything away from Drew McIntyre. Drew never really hit the Claymore or anything like that, but I feel like if they were going to do this match again, I'd probably be okay with seeing it, because then I'd want to see like a different outcome. Like, maybe this time Drew does hit the Claymore. Would Bobby have kicked out of a Claymore? I don't know. But Lashley definitely was the right call to have win this match too, because now he feels like the new biggest threat in the company. Like, he might have the title for a while, hopefully till like, I don't know, the end of the year or SummerSlam or something, or next WrestleMania, whatever. But once he beat Drew McIntyre, it's like, well, now who's going to take the title off of Bobby? And it makes me want to know who's next. It was an incredible match. It kicked off night 1. It was a lot better than the Fiend versus Randy Orton that kicked off night 2, so we'll give him credit there, I guess. And it was the match that I expected it to be, and it was the right call to start off, to have Drew McIntyre be the first entrance for the fans, barring the rain delay that they had, of course, which was unfortunate, and I feel like it took away a little bit of momentum. But aside from that, that was the right call to start, and had the right finish to it. And number 3 for me, surprisingly, was a match I didn't expect to be as good as it was. It was Damien Priest and Bad Bunny versus The Miz and John Morrison. The breakout star of this whole thing was actually Bad Bunny. I was surprised at how much he actually put into this match, like how much effort he actually put into training for this match. I've heard he did a lot at the Performance Center over the weeks and everything else. He did some incredible moves that even some of the actual superstars can't do. At one point, he did a Canadian Destroyer to John Morrison. He did some flips off the ropes and Hurricane Ranas and everything else. He was in for most of the match. He was the one that was like Miz and Morrison were working on before he tagged in Damien Priest. And Bad Bunny even ended the match, I believe. Or maybe Damien Priest got the final pin. But Bad Bunny looked like some kind of new superstar that just came up from NXT or something. Like he felt like one of the superstars, which is that surprised me the most. He was definitely the standout in this, but I feel like he might have overshadowed Damien Priest a little bit, because now it's like Damien Priest doesn't feel like that big of a deal because everybody's talking about Bad Bunny. But for what it was, with that all in mind, it was a pretty surprisingly amazing match, and it went a lot longer than I expected it to. I had a lot of fun. Like, it was really fun to watch. If you haven't seen it, go check out go check it out, because that's one of the matches I would suggest. And it was one of the better celebrity matches I've seen, honestly. He did more than Logan Paul did, so that's saying something. And number 2 for me was the triple threat match for the Universal title. It was Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan versus the 2021 Royal Rumble winner, Edge. It was a lot of fun to watch. They did a good job making it hard to figure out who was going to win. And it was unpredictable, because honestly, you wanted Edge to win because he was the Royal Rumble winner. We wanted Daniel Bryan to win because he just got inserted into the match. And it might be his last WrestleMania. I don't know if anybody thought Roman was going to retain, but he did, and that was kind of my only gripe with it, was that instead of having the Royal Rumble winner actually win the title, like with Edge, Roman retained the title. He pinned both men at the same time. Like, that was unique, but I feel like that's just setting up for Edge winning the title somewhere else, instead of on the grandest stage of them all, where he should have won it in the first place. After 11 years, he doesn't win the title at WrestleMania. I guess they're setting up that, like, because Daniel was part of this match, that that Daniel essentially cost Edge the match by being here in the first place. So maybe they're building a feud with Edge and Daniel Bryan out of this, but they do have what they're calling WrestleMania Backlash, so that we'll probably get like Roman versus Edge one-on-one there, and they'll make that a bigger show than WrestleMania was for some reason. And instead of being in front of a live crowd, Edge will win the title in front of the Thunderdome crowd again. Which, honestly, other than that, though, that's like my only gripe with the whole match. The match was good for what it was, too. I mean, it was a lot of, like, when it was one-on-one, we saw, like, one-on-one with Edge and Daniel for a while before Roman got in the ring. There was one point where Edge was going to win. He hit the spear on Roman, and then Daniel Bryan pulled the referee out of the ring to stop the count, which is something normally a heel would do, but Daniel did it as kind of like a desperation move, which I thought was unique, and you could see that Edge was angry and everything else. He pulls out steel chairs and all this other stuff. And then the ending happened where Roman pretty much, I think he speared both of them, and then just kind of dragged Edge on top of Daniel and pinned them both. I could see a bit of controversy there that maybe Edge also technically pinned Daniel, so that could be setting up how they get this a new match out of this. But for being a triple threat match, it was honestly better than it probably would have been at a one-on-one with Roman and Edge, but I think the wrong person won here. And finally, the one match that I thought was the standout match of the whole show was the best match on the entire card. It was Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks, the main event of night 1 for the SmackDown Women's Championship. I think this was the most, like, well done match of the entire show. Like, you could feel the emotion in both Sasha and Bianca, because they were actually this was actually the first women's singles match to main event a WrestleMania, which would have been the case a few years ago with Becky versus Ronda, but they ended up inserting Charlotte into that. That was the first women's main event of WrestleMania, but it was a triple threat match. This one was worthy of the main event slot because it was one-on-one, and these two were really good in the ring together. It was the main event we all deserved, and it certainly lived up to it. Both Bianca and Sasha put up a great WrestleMania performance, I feel like, and honestly, it was better than that triple threat Raw Women's title match from a few years ago with Becky, Ronda, and Charlotte. This match deserves to be known as the best match on the entire show. If the whole show had been one night, I feel like this should have been the main event, and it probably would have been the main event. And I just feel like it was well crafted all around. They told a good story with every move that they did. There was one point where Bianca whipped Sasha with her hair like she used to do in NXT, and you could hear the crack with it because there's like a point on the end. She left a big old scar on the Sasha's side that sounded like it hurt. I would not want to take that move if I was a wrestler, honestly. And then Bianca hit the kiss of death for the win. And then you could see like the emotion with it and everything, like she was crying after the match. I think Montez Ford came out after the show went off the air to, kind of hold her up and hug her and everything else. It was an incredible moment, and it deserves to go down as one of the best WrestleMania matches of all time and the best match of WrestleMania 37. So there you go, guys. Those were my predictions for WrestleMania 37. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments section. What did you think of the whole show? What did you think was the best match on the show? And be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Every Thursday right here on our channel, we talk about wrestling. So if you're a wrestling fan, keep an eye out for that. Thank you for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.